And we want to welcome Robert Mazur to the program. He is here for a second time with us this morning, and he's going to be talking about the IRS today. Good morning, Bob. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thanks for being with us. And as I was reminding our listeners a little bit earlier, you are the author of the New York Times bestsellers, The Infiltrator, and your new book, The Betrayal. Both are just gripping reads, and we'll get to some of that a little bit later. But we've heard that the IRS is set to receive $80 billion in funding. And the question is, how are they going to use it? And you have worked for the IRS Criminal Division. You worked for them for 11 years, and you see what they hope to do with the funding. And you say that it's badly needed. There's a lot of people who are out there saying that they're going to be thugs coming to your door with weapons. What do you say about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to figure out who the witnesses are they interviewed to determine that that's going to be the case. I'm not a big fan of the government at many times. Listen, I got audited one time, and I shouldn't have been audited because somebody wound up making a mistake filling out a 1099. They put it in my name individually rather than my company's name, and I couldn't even get through to the IRS. The phones don't answer. Nobody calls you back, and all I kept getting was harassing letters. So I'm not suggesting. Well, and then eventually I had to pay $1,200 to a CPA who could get the thing resolved, and they can get him to listen to it. And he gave him the same information that I kept giving him. So I'm not saying I'm a fan of the government, but let's step back and take a look at this. First of all, it's $78 billion over 10 years. It's not $78 billion in 1 year. Number two, currently there's been a cutback in the last 10 years of roughly 31% of the resources that are applied toward enforcement, and especially as it relates to criminal investigators who handle very, very high-level, sophisticated cases. If you haven't taken notice, there has been a number of banks, international banks, that have admitted to criminal conspiracies with tens of thousands of the wealthiest Americans in the United States. I can go through the list of the banks, some of the more common ones. Union Bank of Switzerland, they paid a $780 million fine. They said, yeah, that's what we were doing. We conspired with them. The types of things they do is they give them offshore corporations, nominee directors, so nobody can figure out who really owns the accounts. They come from Switzerland and from other haven countries to the United States with encrypted computers to show them their account records. They deliver cash in the United States to these wealthy people. They make fake loans. They even give them burner phones so that the government can't determine that they're calling Switzerland to coordinate on their accounts. That is a very, very big adversary. And what have we done over the last 10 years? Over the last 10 years, we've cut 31%, and you can look at the convictions. Now, mom-and-pop grocery store do not get convicted criminally of income tax evasion. The ones who get convicted criminally, what drew me to being work for the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS back in the Ice Age, 1971. 72, I got out of college, and I started as an agent immediately. And I heard the story about how law enforcement really got Al Capone. It wasn't because they were able to prove that he was involved in bootlegging and catch him with in a still. It was because they were able to prove that he was in that industry and he had all this excessive wealth and he never paid taxes. And so I don't care how we get the bad guy as long as we get them. Now, IRS Criminal Investigation Division works on terrorist cases. They work on organized crime, corrupt politicians, those types of cases. And convictions in the last 10 years, there were only 2,184 convictions in 2010. But it's gone down 43% to, in 2021, 1,263. What is so important about making sure there are headlines about big-time tax evaders being put behind bars? Well, because it creates voluntary compliance, because the rest of the country sees that there is an efficient and a running IRS, and they don't want to run the risk of kind of pushing the envelope on their tax affairs. When we don't do that, then all of us who pay our taxes are the ones who suffer, because the wealthiest of the wealthy who decide that they want to evade income taxes don't. And hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes don't get collected. So we wind up with deficit spending, and we wind up with an inability to be able to run programs and run at risk very important programs like Social Security and Medicare. So for all of those reasons, I really do believe that this increased budget is so dramatically needed. It will make a net increase. We have a curve of older people who are in the IRS, and in the next 5 years, half the staff will be retiring. If we don't do this, we're going to wind up with a very, very meek number of people who are going to be involved in trying to enforce these laws. With this bill and this funding, we will get the staffing back to where it was 10 years ago. That's the least that we can do in an effort to try to lift the burden off of the individuals who are paying their taxes. It's easy to scare people. It's easy to tell them, oh, they're going to come after you and they're going to have guns. Well, first of all, special agents of the IRS do carry weapons. There was 2,500 of them in 1970 when I signed up. There are 2,200 today, 300 less than there was in 1970. Why do we carry weapons when we're special agents with the Criminal Investigation Division? Because oftentimes we're executing search warrants at the homes of drug traffickers in an effort to get the records to show that they have this massive amount of wealth that they're not reporting, because they are at times put into situations where they are on search warrants with other agencies that are executing search warrants that relate to terrorists. So there is a small portion of the IRS that does need to do that. But out of 100,000, there's 2,200, and those people are working with respect to criminal enforcement. So I guess I've said enough. Let me give you an opportunity to give me your view on this. One last thing. In 1970, when I was working for the IRS, we had 2,500 agents. There were 400,000 millionaires at that time. Today, there are 20 million millionaires and 788 billionaires. And that, if there's the same percentage of the 400,000 that tried to evade taxes, look at the amount of additional people and additional work that needs to be done. So those are my views with respect to this increase over 10 years of a $78 billion budget.
I'm reminded in the popular culture, there's few people that come to mind as far as pop figures that are real, based on real people, is Elliot Ness, and he was a Treasury officer and took down Al Capone. Yep. So I think that what the IRS investigators do and what you guys do is super important. So that's my hot take on the whole thing.
Did I hear you answer the question, Bob, that this bill will not increase scrutiny on small businesses or middle-income Americans?
That's not the intent of it. Now, you need to make sure, we need to hold the leaders' feet to the fire, and the appeal has been that this is going to be used in an effort to try to go after the biggest of the biggest tax evaders. That's why Congress is there. Congress needs to monitor this. This is what you told us in 2022. Now in 2023 and 2024, we need to be looking at the numbers. We need to be seeing that, in fact, this is it's being applied to. But, there are some people out there some have said, well, we should abolish the IRS. Just let everybody pay a small percentage of their gross receipts. Well, let me tell you, the people who don't want to pay income taxes now, if you don't have an enforcement arm of the IRS who's going to look into whether you paid your 3% or not, they're just not going to pay. It's not going to happen. It's unfortunately, human nature. But clearly, that's the intention of this added budget. I know a lot of people have been trying to suggest that that's not what's going to happen, and some of them are in Congress. I suggest that they make sure that they get themselves very much involved in oversight to make sure that the administration does exactly what they claim they're going to be doing.
Absolutely.
Inside your new book, The Betrayal, how can you relate to undercover activity that goes on within the IRS? You just told us about the cartels and that sort of thing. Tell us a little bit more.
Sure. Well, when I was in the IRS, I went through the undercover school, and the one assignment that I did before I went on to another agency, I worked with the Drug Enforcement Administration and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We had 3 undercover agents. The DEA agent was the fictitious head of a cocaine group. I was the money guy, the guy who handled all the money for the group, and the FBI agent who looked like a massive defensive lineman was the enforcer. And we were dealing with, initially, an accountant and an attorney who we knew were laundering money for one of the biggest drug traffickers in the United States at the time. So we used government money to come to them looking for help, allegedly, to have our cocaine proceeds laundered. My role in that case was to be the courier. Their contacts were the owner and manager of a small casino in Las Vegas. These were guys out of Ohio who were part of, alleged to be part of Italian-American organized crime. And so I would go out to Vegas every couple of weeks or so with a suitcase full of cash and carry it into the casino, go into the cage with the owner and the manager. They'd set up fake records. The purpose of all of this was to convert 5, 10s, and 20s into hundreds, because the next step of this was for the accountant and the attorney to smuggle the money to Grand Cayman, where they had the president of a bank there who would open up accounts, no questions asked, and then they would set up offshore entities and then bring the money back into the United States, falsely making it appear to be loans that were being made by the foreign bank for the purposes of then being used by the criminal organization. And eventually, because of our rapport that we developed with those corrupt business people, they introduced us to their main client, who is exactly who we wanted to meet, who was the head of the American-based drug distribution unit, and we were able to take the organization down. But they needed somebody on the money side who really knew business and really knew money. I was a business administration finance major in college. I had all but one class that I needed for an accounting degree, and I'd worked in a bank and I'd worked in a brokerage firm. And with my background, I was convincing to be a corrupt person with a financial background who could work within a criminal organization, as I purported, to handle their money. So that was the assignment that I had. I know of many other IRS special agents who have done undercover. Most of the time, it has been with individuals who are corrupt financial service providers who provide assistance to criminal organizations. We know we have fairly reliable information from the United Nations on Drugs and Crime about the amount of money that's seeking money laundering services every year, and it comes to about $2 trillion from every walk of criminality, whether it's from drug trafficking or from illegal arms dealing or from pilfering treasuries or dealing with prohibited nations like Iran, violating sanctions. And so there is a cottage industry out there of, unfortunately, very sophisticated bankers, attorneys, and financial service providers that help those criminal organizations. And they do that because it's very profitable for them to do it. So in order to be able to go up against that kind of an adversary, we need real resources.
Well, we've been talking once again this morning to Robert Mazur, Bob Mazur. He is the author of The Betrayal. That's his latest book. Bob, thank you so much. We will have you back on. You are just a compelling interview. Please tell our listeners where to pick up your books.
Yeah, if you go to Amazon.com and or just Google Amazon.com and The Betrayal and my name, Mazur, Mazur, you'll find it there. Or you can go to my website, which is just my name, which is Robert Mazur, Mazur.com, no spaces. And there's all sorts of information in there about my first book, The Infiltrator, the movie that was made based upon The Infiltrator, starring Bryan Cranston, and now The Betrayal and the development of a film off of the Betrayal book, which again Bryan Cranston has announced he'll be portraying me again in that one.
All right, good to know. Robert Mazur, thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.